Okay, here we go. So the last thing we learned was we had a brisa that seemed to have said, Tanya command Omar Svina Rekedes, that the shape of the lechem upon was not just like an open box, but like a ship that's dancing in the waves. The Tanya Arba Snifin Shalzov Hayusham, Mifutzalan Mirashayan, Kimin Darkonim Hayu. The sideboards had things sticking out like cradles to support the bread. Shasayim Cham Behenes Alechem. And the punchline is Shehudaima Kimin Tzvina Rekedes. Now we're completely changing the subject to discuss if there's going to be a psul yotzei. What was unique about the carbon of the lechem aponim is that it was there for a week. It was on the shulchan for a week. Unlike every other carbon that was around only for a day, or if it was a shlomim for 2 days, this was around for a week. So it was subject to upheaval. Ibailu, lechem aponim, nifsal b'masois, or eidu nifsal b'masois. In the midbar, they had the lechem aponim on the shulchan, waiting to be eaten the next Shabbos, and suddenly the onon starts to move. They have to pack up the mishkan, pack up the kalim, and travel. So now it's ois mishkan. It could be possible yotzei. All the other kabbanis, you can wrap up, you can burn, you can do whatever you have to do, and by morning you leave after you finish processing a carbon. But if you have the lechem aponim sitting, and now suddenly we're dismantling the mishkan, will it become possible b'masois? Zogt Rashi, Kishanois in Yisrael b'midbar. Umefarken ha-mishkan, and they take apart the mishkan, the noisin ha-shulchan im halachem. They actually carry the shulchan, they transport the shulchan loaded with the lechem aponim on it. Kedichsiv al shulchan aponim yifreshu beget chelas. So the question the Gemara is asking is, mi nifsal lechem b'yotzei eloi, because now that the lechem is leaving the mishkan, there is no mishkan to stay in. Will it become possible yotzei? Let's look at the psukim that the Rashi quotes. It says, "Val shulchan aponim yifresu." So I read it wrong. I said yifresu. It's yifresu beget chelas. They should cover the shulchan with a beget chelas. V'nosnu alav as a kairos, as a kabois. Have the shulchan fully loaded with all of its kalim. There's a menachos. While they transported the shulchan, they left the lechem aponim on it. Yeah, it seems like everything was they had to transport everything as a unit. So it would have been a little bit challenging how to move everything that it should stay aligned. Yeah. So that's the Gemara's question. Does it become possible yotzei? And now next week, what do you do with these breads, right? Because if they're possible yotzei, you can't use them. So Zog to Gemara as follows: Iboiluhu lechem aponim nisal b'masois or einin nisal b'masois. Then I keep my finger on Rashi. Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shua ben Levi. We have a machlokes Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shua ben Levi. The maskana of the Gemara is going to be they don't argue at all. But right now, the Havamin is there's a machlokes. Chad Amar Nifsal. One of them say it's going to be possible. The Chad Amar Einin Nifsal. And the other one says it's not going to be possible. Man Amar Nifsal. The Mandam holds that it becomes possible yotzei. Dichsiv kasher yachanu kein yisou. The rules are not suspended during travel. The same way the rules of affect and control when the Mishkan is stable, the rules apply when the Mishkan is dismantled. Ma b'chaniyasai nifsal b'yotzei, just like when the Mishkan is set up, if the lechem aponim would leave the Azara, it would become possible. Af b'nisiyasai nifsal b'yotzei. Zogt Rashi b'chaniyasai nifsal b'yotzei im yotzei chutz l'kloim k'dichsiv v'hoysel arnu levanov v'chalu b'makoim kadosh. That's the key word. Okay. But Mandamar Einin Nifsal Dichsiv, there's a different pasuk that we quoted a moment ago. V'lechem atamid olav yiyeh, as Rashi says, yiyeh alma b'kedusha seikoi. They retain their kedusha when they're traveling with the lechem upon them loaded onto the shulchan, even though there's no Makam Kodesh anymore, even though the Azara is dismantled. It's fragt the Gemara ve'idich nami yaksiv kasher yachnu ken yiso. What is the Mandamar who holds that v'lechem atamid olav yiyah, but it does say kasher yachnu ken yiso as well?
Why don't you? What do you mean? That's a secondary reason that it retains its kedusha, and therefore. But the primary reason was in the order of that they were in when they were
same setup of the same setup they had when they were resting. They kept that formation while traveling.
Right, that's the pshat.
Right. The Gemara is going to bring it up. The Gemara is going to bring it up.
A secondary pshat.
Right.
It's a drash.
But the drash does say that the psul yoytze should apply, even while they're traveling.
I'm sorry. He says
the drash tells us that the psul yoytze will apply even when they're traveling.
Okay, but it's a drash. But he's asking, what do you do with the pasuk? You don't have to.
What's wrong with pasuk pshat in the pasuk?
Yeah. Because you have to darshan it.
Just learn pasuk pshat, and you don't have problems.
Right.
I hear it. I hear it. So Zok to Gemara leidach kisa. L'maisa the Gemara's explanation fits him pretty good. So maybe it wouldn't be a tiyufta if they couldn't have dealt with the drash, like you're saying, because the pasuk pshat is maintained. But l'maisa they could accommodate even the drash of the pasuk leidach kisa. You learn the punkt verkehrt. Ma b'chani yasoi ki lo yatam imkayim eloi mifsol. Just like when the Mishkan is set up, if everything is working properly and nothing left the Makam Kadosh, it wouldn't be possible. Af b'nisiyasoi ki lo yatam imkayim eloi mifsol. As long as everything is in the place that it's designated to be, even though there's no Mishkan around because it's dismantled, but the lechem upon is on the shulchan as it's supposed to be, as the Torah tells us, that would not be possible. Meaning, it's a mashma that the lechem stays kosher during travel. Why? How can you justify saying that it becomes possible? Ella, we have to change pshat because the lechem upon him, the Torah seems to say mufurish. It's on the shulchan tamid. It must be that it's kosher. So how could you argue that it's not kosher during travel? Ella, we have to retract. Ki aser avdimi amar b'misuder the kul amaloi pligi. Everybody agrees when the lechem aponim is sitting on the shulchan and they transport it in its place on the shulchan, it will for sure not be possible yaitse. And that's how everybody has to accommodate the lechem hatomid olav yiyah. So where does someone hold that it becomes possible? Elaki pligi b'misulik. If the lechem upon him is taken off the shulchan, and we're going to have to explain what that means. Mandamar nifsal dechsiv kasher yachnu ken yiso ma b'chaniyosei nifsal b'yoytzei af b'nisiyosei mifsal b'yoytzei. Mandamar any nifsal dechsiv v'nosa oyel moyed. The pasuk says during travel that the oyel moyed travels, even though the oyel moyed is not set up, it's folded up, and it's in its form. Nevertheless, the Torah refers to it as an oil moed, even while it's in transit. Aval pi shenosa oil moedu. So let's pause for a minute and let's see what b'mesuluk means. What does it mean if the lechem aponim were taken off the table? Shadayin lo yigia zman l'salak etzeh ad, and we have to look at the test because there's a lot of extra explanation required. Shadayin lo yigia zman l'salak etzeh ad, and I'll have to find the test where it is somewhere here. It's down here at the bottom by me. Ad shenosu, if they did not take the lechem upon him off the shulchan, who was sitting on the shulchan, it was a Tuesday afternoon, and now they got to move. So the lechem upon him is on the shulchan still. Kula alma loy pligi, the loy ifsel. Everybody would agree that lechem would not be possible because of that pasuk we had, aksiv lechem haponim tamid. When everything is as it's supposed to be structured, it will not become possible yaitse. But keep pligi b'mesulak. What does mesulak mean? Shesalkua b'Shabbos. We're on the Shabbos afternoon, and they take the old lechem upon him off the shulchan, and they put a new lechem upon him on the shulchan. Now they have this lechem upon him that's supposed to be distributed and eaten by the kaihanim in the azara. And what happened was, v'siduracher, they already have a new set of lechem upon him sitting on the shulchan that will be protected by the lechem upon him tamid that it says in the pasuk. But it's the lechem tamid that we took off that now has to be eaten by the kaihanim. They're mesulak. V'loy hispigo lecha loisam achinosu. But yet they didn't have a chance. The kaihanim didn't have a chance to eat that lechem upon him until it was packed up. Now the question is, can they eat it? Can they eat it tonight? So Rashi said, and of course now we know the Shida adds in that we're talking about the lechem upon him that came off on the Shabbos that now they have to travel with. Now even when they traveled, they maintained a formation, and there was a machan leviyah. There was just no mishkan anymore. So the question is, since these breads remain in the machan leviyah, is that good enough? Mishkan udegale machane Yisrael savav. They traveled information as we mentioned earlier. That's a pasuk in the pasuk. So since it's in the machane leviyah, would that protect it from becoming pasul al tziyotze?
Why isn't this a kasha on the Tamid Shachar and the Tamid Arbaim? How did they bring it?
They bring the Tamid, they burn it, and then after it's burned, then they leave. But the lechem upon they have no choice.
No, while they're walking, how do they do it? While they're traveling.
Would they makar karbanis during transit? I don't think so. I thought that. So there were gaps where they didn't bring any karbanis. It must have been how.
So why? So the lechem upon him, it should be the same.
But the problem is we have the bread here, and it's not destroyed. Will it be possible because of Yosy? Because they were supposed to eat it up quickly before they left, but they didn't have a chance to. So what do we do with this lechem?
So the only question is it possible? That's the only kasha.
Correct. That's the discussion.
Not whether you do it or not. How do you bake bread while you're walking in the desert?
They didn't. They didn't start moving till Shabbos afternoon. So they had already baked the bread.
But
if they were traveling for 2 weeks, they must have suspended all the activity. Like you're saying, how can you do the Avodah when everything's packaged up in suitcases?
Right.
I didn't I'm only Gemara. I think it's funny, like for weeks at a time, they just wouldn't do Avodah. We're in travel. Like sukkah. When you travel, you don't have to do the sukkah.
Okay.
What?
They weren't traveling. The bread comes off. They have to eat it by the end of the day.
They will, the next morning, everything becomes possible in the next morning. Yeah. That's a very important point you're bringing up. Besides the psul yotze, if they didn't eat it on time, there would be a psul lina. So that's going to come into play very, very soon. Okay, so let's see where we're holding. So we have our machlokes by Mesulak. Now there's a very important shita mikubetzes. So I want to look at the shita mikubetzes for a minute. B'mesudar, Gillian Pirish Akundris, maybe is that what it says? B'mesudar ala shulchan shadayin lo higia, meaning if it's mesudar on the shulchan, meaning on a Tuesday morning when there was the lechem upon them sitting on the shulchan, you pack it up. That's not an issue. Aches al kuba Shabbos. Frek the shiduk tes kosher. The al korchach b'Shabbos leinasu. They never traveled on Shabbos. This shaila seems only to be relevant if on Shabbos they packed up today. Because if they left on Sunday, that there's no issue anymore. There's nothing mesulak. The lechem upon them would have already been eaten or disposed of. So you have to say that the shaila in our Gemara is they packed up to leave on Shabbos. But on Shabbos they never traveled. Mishum haitzah. First of all, there's a problem of haitzah. They have to carry the whole Mishkan. They never traveled on Shabbos.
Yeah, but they had an Erev. The whole thing. If the whole
it was a moving Erev. It was a moving Erev.
Yeah.
But Erev works for a Rishus Rabbim Derabanan, not for a Rishus Rabbim Deraisa. Now I don't know if there was a Rishus Rabbim Deraisa in the Midbar.
Isn't that the definition of a Rishus Rabbim based on the 600,000
Oh, right.
people.
They're a walking 600,000.
That's right.
Wherever they went, there was Rabim. So the Erev wouldn't help for them. Right, that's an Erev only helps for a Carmelis, which is only also made Rabbanan. And the Erev never helps for a
Anyway, it's there's a custom. If the Rosh Hashanah says to move, you move.
I guess so, but the Shita must know that they didn't travel on Shabbos.
Oh,
so
that's another thing. Okay, yeah. That's another.
But the Shita says the reason why it seems to be the Shita knows they didn't travel on Shabbos, because how could you? It's so. So it's circular logic.
Right.
It's the same way we know that Moshe Rabbeinu wore a shtramel.
Right. Right.
There's a mechamer as well. Oops, Tosis says so later. So what's the case over here? So the Shita offers a complicated case. It was Shabbos Yom Kippur. It's like the story with the fellow who asks the Rav he needs a kapara because he didn't wash mayim machronim. It turns out because it was Yom Kippur, right? So really, what we're talking about is this was a Shabbos that was Yom Kippur. Shabbos Yom Kippur, shalechem aponim nechal erev b'motzai Shabbos. That day, normally they eat the lechem aponim on Shabbos during the day, but this day they couldn't because it was Yom Kippur. So they were going to eat it Motzei Yom Kippur. But they couldn't eat the lechem upon him because they left Motzei Shabbos, which was also Motzei Yom Kippur. V'yesiluk masois balayla. We're going to soon see if the case is, if the only case is where they couldn't eat it by day and they had to eat it by night, and they couldn't eat it. Why? Because they started to travel. So that proves that sometimes we start to travel in the middle of the night. Because if there was also a rule that you don't travel during the day, that you don't travel during the night, only during the day, then this whole shiloh wouldn't be possible to occur. It must be that they're traveling at night, and they're going to.
Well, there's a pasuk that says they traveled by night.
Right. So the Gemara is going to bring that up shortly. Siluk masois balayla. So I'm not talking about traveling, but I'm talking about beginning to depart at night. They definitely traveled by night. The question is, would they depart at night? So you have to say that they did depart at night, because otherwise this shaila couldn't be relevant. Like Abaye will shortly prove from this situation. Chal Yom Kippur Liyos b'Shabbos Hachalois Mischalkos Le'erev Ad Kan L'Shoinai. So that's how the Shita wants to learn. Our shaila here is that there was a travel set on a Motzei Yom Kippur. So now you have all this lechem that you want to eat at night, but we had to take apart the machane, and now you don't have a mishkan anymore. Will it be possible b'yotzei? That is what the Gemara shaila is at this point. So Kiyas Rabdimi Amar B'Mesuda the Kula Amalei Pligi Alaki Pligi B'Mesulak Mandam Nifsal the Chsib Kasher Yachnu Kini. So Ma B'Chan Yosy Nifsal B'Yotzei Af Ben Seyosei Mifsal B'Yotzei. Lemanda Amar Ein Nifsal. The Mandam Old is not Nifsal the Chsib V'Nasa Oil Moed, and we learn from there Aval B'Shanasa Oil Moedu. Correct Gemara V'Idich Nami Haksiv Kasher Yachnu Kain Yisau. The same kasha we asked before, it seems to indicate that the same psulim of yotzei that apply when the mishkan is at rest should also apply when the mishkan is in transit. So that's Gemara, the same answer we said earlier. Just like when the mishkan is at rest, if you don't tamper and take anything out of where it's supposed to be, it will not be possible. If you don't take it out of where it's supposed to be, it will not be possible. As Rashi me'azara v'hashanami lo'afke mimachan levia, because the machan levia is still intact, because when they traveled in formation. Doesn't it say that it's an oil moed, meaning that it shouldn't be possible yotzei, because even though they're in transit, it's still considered an oil moed. So after Gemara, this is what David was saying a minute ago is Hahula the Golamudasa. That's just telling us that they had to travel information. Lahayrais, as Rashi says, Eze Degal Yisa Rishon, Vezem Toy, Veza Achmed. That was the setup, the formation of travel. The Idich, I don't need the pasuk of a Nasa Oil Moy to tell me that. I have a different pasuk, Mimachana Halavim, Pesoich Hamachana Isnafka. That's how we know that they traveled information. Frag the Gemara Kasha. So now we have a machloikis b'silukai if the lechem upon them were taken off to be eaten on Shabbos, which was Yom Kippur, and Mata Shabbos they traveled and they dismantled the Mishkan. Will these breads become posel b'yotzei? Meisei frag the Gemara Kasha. B'shas siluk masois. The Brisa tells us that when they started to travel and they dismantled the Mishkan, there was some changes. Kachim nivsalim b'yotzei. Any karbanos that were around would be possible b'yotzei. Rashi explains, she'ein lehem kloim. There's no more azara. V'afal pikein hamachana kadosh. Yet the machana still retains its kedusha because the next words in the Bryce are v'zavin u'mitzayoyin mishtachin chutz l'mechitzasan. That means the zav and the mitzvah have to be out of the machane shchina levia and machane Yisrael. So that's a little bit strange because if we say that these machanos, these zones, are bottle when they're traveling, well, you see for sure that they do have still some type of zones. So that is the question. So kachim nefsam b'yoyt she'elam klayim ve'aval pikein hamachane kadosh v'zavin u'mitzayroin mishtal k'dechutz me'mechitzasan. A mitzvah is chutz l'machane Yisrael. They had to be out of the camp after everybody, behind everybody. So the zav would be out of the machane levia, and the mitzvah would even be out of the machane Yisrael. My love, afilu lechem aponim. The lechem aponim should be no different than other kachim, and it should be possible yotzei. So you have a raya to the shita who holds that when it's mesulak, it's possible yotzei. Zok Gemara loy bar mi lechem aponim. All karbonis, yes, will become possible yotzei, but the lechem aponim is different. It will not become possible yotzei. Fragt Gemara, how could you make that distinction? Monavshach. Iyoyel moed dafkahu. If it is considered an oil moed, as you darshan the pasuk, aval b'shanas oil moedu, if that's real, so it's real for everything. Afilu kachim nami. And the oil moed lav dafkahu, and if it doesn't really mean that the oil moed retained its kedusha, well then afilu lechem aponim nami should be possible b'yotzei. Ela ki asa rabin omar mar, we have to change again, and there's no machloikis at all. Rather ki asa rabin omar. Mar Omar b'Mesudar, Mar Omar b'Mesuluk v'loy pligi. There's no machlokes. Everybody agrees when the Mishkan is Mesudar, the lechem is not possible yotzei because it's on the shulchan in the Mishkan in the Azara. But b'Mesuluk, everybody agrees that the lechem upon him is possible. So that means once they dismantle the Mishkan, that bread can no longer be eaten and would have to be burnt. And there's no machlokes at all. As you see on the left, there's a long Tosfos. Tosfos brings Rais from the Gemara we had in Zavachim, where it says that the kachim do not become possible when the Mishkan is dismantled. So Tosfos discusses the difference between that sugya and this sugya. So Tosfos brings a pshat and Rashi that we had back then in Zavachim that explains the Mishnah that it's referring to if they started dismantling the Azara, but they didn't yet dismantle the Mizbeach, and the Mizbeach was still intact. That's when things wouldn't be possible. Zog to Gemara weiter. Amar Abai, Shema Mina, from the fact that we're saying that they traveled in the middle of the night, because this whole Shiloh was if Yom Kippur fell out on the Shabbos and they have to eat the lechem at night, but now they're packing up, so the Azara gets dissolved before they had a chance to eat the lechem upon them, you have a raya that yesh siluk masois belayla. You have a clear raya that they would start traveling by night and they would dismantle the Azara. Otherwise, this whole thing is not relevant. The Yisol Gedaydach ain't siluk masois belayla. Amos Modly, when would they pack up to go? Let's suffer in the morning. In the morning, if there's still lechem upon him around, my irya mishum yoytze. Forget the fact that it's possible mishum yoytze. Even if it's not possible mishum yoytze, it's possible because it becomes noisar. Typically, the ifsalei belina. If Hashem says we're leaving tonight, and that means we pack up first thing in the morning because we don't leave the night, well, that means you had a whole night to eat this lechem upon him. If you didn't, it's possible because it becomes noisar. So what's the shaila if it becomes yoytze? It's not relevant. But if they left in the middle of the night, then it could have become possible yoytze even before the morning arrived, before it could become possible belina. So Zok Gemara, typically the ifsalei belina. So Elamai, you have a raya from here that yesh shiluk masayis belayla. Frank the Gemara, David's kasha. Pshita, I don't need a bayit to figure this out from a shaila in the Gemara. It's a mafurish pasuk. It says laleches yom v'layla. They traveled at night. Zok Gemara, Mao the Tema, from that pasuk, I would think hanami lehechi the akar b'yamama. If they departed by day, they would continue moving at night. They wouldn't stop over at a Motel 6 for the night. They would continue to travel by night. But if they didn't pack up to leave by day and night arrived and they were told to pack up, they wouldn't leave at night. They always waited for the morning before they left. Kamashmal and Abaye is that they would even take camp down and depart in the middle of the night. Tosfos has a very simple, practical question. Tosfos says, Shemamina yesh siluk masois belayla, pirish bekuntris midikatani kachim nefsalim. The fact that it says that kachim become possible, so how do I know? So where is the raya? See, this is where I was not clear. From where is the raya that they would leave at night? Rashi says, Shemami nomi dekatani kachim nefsalin mishum psul yoytze. How would kachim have a psul yoytze? How would kachim have a psul yoytze if they leave only in the morning? If they leave at night, it must be that they could become possible mishum yoytze. So pirish bekuntris midekatani kachim nefsalin. The ein siluk masois belayla. If they don't leave at night, Emas migli kloim. When would they start packing up the Mishkan? B'tzafra in the morning. In the morning, my area mishum yoytze typically the ifsalei belina. Right? That's how Rashi understood the raya. But Frank says I don't understand the raya. Dil menav kamina heichad nasu b'emtzayoyim. The case could easily be where kachim become possible yoytze if they pack up during the day and leave. So if they pack up during the day and leave, it'll become possible yoytze during the day. So who said you have a raya from here that they didn't leave at night? Maybe they did leave at night. But for the fact that we have this shaila, maybe they didn't leave at night. Maybe they didn't leave at night. So you're asking me how's it nageya that it should become possible? It became possible if they leave during the day. So in Rashi you have to learn. So let's go down to the bottom. The avamrinan. The bishum pam lahir noisin elab oy betchilas yom oy betchilas alayla. So then you have your raya. If it's possible that they leave in the middle of the day, so then the shaila of kachim becoming possible yoytze would be if they left in the middle of the day. But if you hold they either left first thing in the morning or first thing in the evening, so then you can bring a raya that they must have been able to leave first thing in the evening, because otherwise this whole shaila of yoytze wouldn't be relevant because it would become possible because of noiser. Okay, so Dr. Gemara weiter. Or a mini fact Gemara Akasha. Huglalu aparoiches. Once they roll up the paroiches as they're packing up the Mishkan, hutru hazovin umitzayrayin lekanos l'sham. A minute ago we had a brayso that said that even during travel, all of the boundaries remained, and the mitzayir had to leave Machne Yisrael, and the zov had to leave Machne Levia. But this brayso says all those restrictions and all those zones have been removed. In fact, it's a machloikis tanoim whether or not the machanois retain their levels of kedusha during travel. Harbelezer, harabanan. The Tanya we learned. What happens if Roiv Klal Yisrael is Tamei Erev Pesach? They don't push off the Korban Pesach to Pesach Sheni like a Yochid would do. Rather, they're Tumah Hutra B'Tzibur. The Tzibur is going to be makriv the carbon betumas mace, of course. What if there is oven and mitzrayim there, and they figured, hey, if everyone's doing it betumas mace, we'll push in and we'll do it betumas ziva and betumas mitzrayim, which doesn't have that exemption. And they pushed themselves into the Azara. They thought they would bring their carbon as well. Are they chayiv kares or not for coming into the Azara when they're tummy? Yachal yu chayavin. You would have thought that they're chayiv kares for pushing in. Talmud loymar v'shalchu min hamachne kol tzarua v'chol zav v'chol tamei l'nefesh. And we darshan that they're all on the same playing field. When Tamei Mesim are prohibited from coming into the Azara, then and only then, Zavin and Mutzarayin Mishtalchen. But ain't Tamei Mesim Mishtalchen. If Tumah Hutru B'tzibur, and we allow any Tamei Mes now into the Azara to bring their carbon, so all of the restrictions are off, ain't Zavin and Mutzarayin Mishtalchen. So by extension, who adin, if when they're traveling as well, the restrictions of Tamei Meis are off. Why? Because there is no more Azara to come into. Who adin, the restrictions of the Machna Levia and the Machna Shchnina will also be relaxed, and therefore they won't have to send away a Zav and a Mitzayra from the Machna. So it's totally zebazeh. If you hold that when there's a Tumah Hutra B'tzibur, and therefore you allow Tameim into the Azara. So we also remove the Isurim. The Isurim are also removed for Azavim and Mitzayra. So by the same token, when the Beis HaMikdash or the Mishkan is dismantled, you also don't have the restriction on the Tamei Meis, and therefore Rebbe Lezer will hold that there's no restriction for the Zav and the Mitzayra either. Zok Tehelig Mishnah weiter. Achas shtei alechem, v'achas lechem aponim. Shtei alechem and lechem aponim share a similarity, that lishason varichason bechutz. You could set them up, you could make the dough, you could form them and shape them out of the azara. But vafiyoson, they're baked in the azara. The einon doiches is a Shabbos, but their baking is not doiches Shabbos. Now this is going to pose a problem for us. Why will it pose a problem for us? Because when it's baked, it becomes kadosh with kedushas aguf, and now it will be possible belina, and it will be possible yoytze. So if you're going to say it's not doiches Shabbos, that means they had to bake it before Shabbos. If they had to bake it before Shabbos, then it's possible belina. There's no other way. There's no other two ways. So how is it possible any doiches Shabbos? So the Gemara is going to end up saying that if you held Afiyas and Bifnim, you're also going to have to hold this doiches Shabbos. And this mission that says that any doiches Shabbos is going to have to hold that Afiyas could even be b'chutz, and it doesn't become.
Also, we imagine what's inside of the Mishkan or the Azara. We only have two kalim that are mentioned, but you're saying this Mishnah is saying there has to be ovens and probably tables and all sorts of other things.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff there.
Yeah, but there's never all the pictures or the drawings.
It never looks cluttered.
No.
It's like when they show a house when a realtor shows a house, you never see all the junk. You just see it staged.
Right.
Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Kol Maaseyim Bifnim. All of the prep was done in the Azara. Rabbi Shimon Omer, La'olam Havarogel Loimar. Rabbi Shimon says that in the Besmerish, everyone always said it's a known zach that Shtei Alechem v'Lechem Aponim are Ksheres ba'Azara u'Ksheres b'Bespagi, which we knew was out of the Azara. Bespagi was that larger perimeter. Rashi is Bespagi b'Chol Yerushalayim d'Kasavar Afiyasa Nami b'Chutz. Here you could do all of the avodos b'Chutz. You didn't have to bake the Lechem Aponim inside. So there seems to be a stira mineube. Amit lishasa varichasan b'Chutz. Alma midas yavesh loy niskacha, because the lishasan and the richasa means you have to measure out the flour b'chutz. So the midas yavesh, the midah to measure the isar and silas, could not have become a klisharis, because if it was a klisharis, it would be b'fnim. V'afiyasam b'fnim, meaning alma midas yavesh niskacha. If it was baked inside, that's also That means the keli to measure had to be inside. That means the midas yavish was niskacha. Is it niskacha or not? Amarava hiksha adam kasha shahu kasha kabarzel. Somebody asked a starker person, a very, very starker person, was able to come up with a teretz which requires that he should be kosher kabarzel to come up with a teretz to this kasha. Umani Rab Sheshes. Who is this Adam Kosher Kabarzel, this massive Talmud Chochem, who is also able to answer an eyes in the kasha? Now we know that if this is an eyes in the kasha, this is where it comes from. This is an eyes in the kasha, and an eyes in the mensch come from an eyes in the kasha. My kasha, what was your question? Dilma Isarin loy mekadosh. The Isarin measuring cup was not mekadosh, and therefore they were able to make the lisha and the richa out of the mishkan. But the tanur, it's also you're referring to it as a midas hayavesh, but the tanur was mekadosh, so it's not a steer. We're talking about Dudim and Caleb. That was the eyes in the teretz to the eyes in the kasha. But kasha, if you do want to have a kasha, there's a very big kasha here. It's just not this kasha. It's hakasha. It says v'afiyosam b'fnim. If it's aviyosam b'fnim, alma taner mekadosh. That means the taner is a klishurish and it's going to be mekadosh to lachem with kedushas agov when you bake it there. But the Mishnah says ve'ein doiches es a Shabbos. It's not doiches Shabbos. So if it's not doiches Shabbos, they had to be mekadosh with the kedushas agov before Shabbos. Well, if that's the case, if shalabelino, that's an eyes in the kasha. Amarava, well, we have an eyes in the terrace for the second eyes in the kasha as well. Hiksha Adam kasha shu kasha kabarsel. An eisene person was able to answer this eisene kasha. Umani Rab Sheshes, Amar Rabashi. My kusha, what's the kasha? Dilma my be befnim, b'mokim is reason. Maybe mi befnim doesn't literally mean that the oven was in the azara. It just means it was in an area controlled by kaihanim, as Rashi says. B'mokim is reason, but kaihanim is reason shalayachmitz. They're going to be reason to make sure that it doesn't become chametz. We know that the lechem aponim couldn't be chametz. It had to be matzah. So it's Mokum's reason, even though it was not in the Azara, it was in a place that was under tight control. The Rishonim ask, okay, that explains the lechem aponim, but the shtei lechem was chametz. Why would that need Mokum's reason? So they say, he brings down from Rishonim that you needed reason to make sure that it didn't become chametz. They had to make sure it was probably chametz. We're always worried not to make something chametz. But when the Torah says it has to be chametz, you need an expert to make sure that it will be chametz. But the truth is, this is not a good teretz. It's a joke. You know why? Because manavshech iafia be'inon zrizin. If afia requires zrizin, in other words, Kaihanim have to be involved in the afiyah, well then Lisha, Varicha Nami Ba'in's reason. They should require the same thing. Yet it's quite clear from the Mishnah that there's a distinction between the Lishasan and Arichasan and the Afiyasan. If you want to say it's totally in supervision of the Kaihanim, well, just like the afiyah needs that supervision, the Lisha and the Aricha would require that same supervision. So therefore, the Elisha Varicha loy b'in's reason, afiyanami loy b'in's reason. El Rabashi bedusi, or Brusi. So we have a problem. We have a stira. We talk have a stira. So what does it mean? Shabbos. So you have to answer. Tosfos in a one-liner. Tosfos in a one-liner says all the way to bottom. El Rabashi bedusi and v'taver misha shanazu loy shanazu. You have to say that the two clauses in our Mishnah are two different tonight. The Tanu says that it's Ein Dech Shabbos holds that it was not done bifnim. Okay, we are running up against the clock, so let's just quickly learn another line and we'll stop. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Kol Ma'aseh bifnim. Omer Bavo Bar Kahana Ushnei Mikra Echadorshu. They actually both learned this from one pasuk. They just have a difference of opinion as to how to dash in the pasuk. It says when David HaMelech was running away from Shaul, who was trying to kill him, he was starving to death. He came to the Noivir Kahanim, and all they had was lechem upon him, and he said, give me to eat that lechem upon him, I'm starving to death. So he said, well, who derech choil? It's derech choil. He was referring to this lechem upon him, af ki ayoyim yikadosh b'chli, even though we're going to be b'kadosh b'chli. So Rabbi Yehuda Sovar, b'choil ashkechinu, he came on Friday. David HaMelech was coming on Friday, was starved. They were baking the lechem upon him on Friday, and he told them, Amarlu derech chol ka'afisule. You're baking the derech chol. If you're baking it on Friday, it can't become kodesh kedushas aguf, because if it became kodesh kedushas aguf, it would be possible by tomorrow. Afka yoyim kodesh bechli, if salei belina. It's choil, because if it wasn't choil, then you couldn't possibly bake it today. It would be possible. So let me have it, because it's not kodesh kedushas aguf. The Gemara is going to bring that up soon. Rabbi Shimon Savar b'Shabbos hashkichinu. It was on Shabbos that he came. The ka'afale that they were baking it. So he came while they were baking it, and he said, "Give it to me." Amalahu loy derech choil ba'isa lemivdi. It's choil. The tanner is not going to be mekadesh the lechem. Midi tanner mekadesh shulchan hu de mekadesh. The shulchan is being mekadesh. So therefore, from the different ways to interpret this pasuk, it'll tell us whether or not they baked the bread on Friday or whether they baked the bread on Shabbos. You're assuming that he got there while they were baking it. No, he got there after they had already baked it. That was taken off already. So they had lechem upon him that was removed already from the shulchan, meaning the baking happened a long time ago. He came after it was baked. Elamai derech choil de ka'amarlahu. So what does he mean that it's derech chol? Hari kamarlei leka lechem kiim lechem haponim hamoishin milfnei Hashem. They told him, we'd love to give you lechem, but this is the lechem haponim that has kedushas aguf that's got to go to the kahanim. Amarlahu, he said, loy mi boy hi. I'm not worried about this. The chivin enavak lemi meila. There's no din me'ila on it. You know why? Because once it's given to the kahanim to eat, there's no din me'ila on it. Yeah, I'm not a kohen, I'm not allowed to eat it, but I won't be over me'ila. I'll just be over eating what a kohen is supposed to eat. Derech cholu. Elafilu heich nami dayoim. Even if it's lechem upon him that was not yet discharged, meaning the stuff that you just put on, which the kahanim are not allowed to eat, which is mamish kodesh b'kedushas aguf, it cannot come off the shulchan. Still havali the leichel. I still give it to me. You know why? Because I'm starving to death, which is what Dovi said. If Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, they're not arguing about a pasuk, because we already said pshat in the pasuk is he came after it was baked. So where did they get this machlokes as to whether or not they baked it in the Zara or if they baked it out of the Zara? They just have a kabbalah from their rebbes. One had a kabbalah, they baked it in the kedushas aguf in the Mishkan. One held that it was out just because of a kabbalah, and they kanami. Because how did Reb Shimon express his halacha? The Kedani Reb Shimon Neimer la'olam have a ragalaymer. The Velt used to say. What do you mean the Velt used to say? It must be from a kabbalah, otherwise he'd say a pasuk. La'olam have a ragalaymer shtei alechem ulechem upon him ksheres ba'azara uksheres abespagi. The way he presented the halacha sounds like it was coming mipi kabbalah shema mina, that it's just a machlokes based on what each one heard from their rebbe. So we'll stop here.